It's no shocker to anyone that beauty standards for men and women drastically diverge. But as beauty standards have twisted and heightened over time, we're finding ourselves in an interesting social media era where men also seem to be dipping their toes into the a la mode trends of the time in ways they previously weren't doing. What's driving this shift? And is it indicative of a larger societal transformation in the way that we look at attractiveness, desirability, and what that means for both genders? Welcome to BS, a podcast where we take an in-depth look at different scientific and social phenomena and innovations whilst tying them back to broader societal perspectives and why you should care. We're so happy you're here and enjoy the episode. So, girl, let's talk about the shifting beauty standards for men. I'm excited about this episode. I think it's definitely going to be fun to dive into it because I know you and me both have seen the way that things have been shifting.
My For You page is full of bald men. And the very distinctive chia pet dots, and I at first I was like, what is going on? But I'm just the more and more I see, it's just Istanbul is definitely at the scene of the crime
every time.
And also I don't even think they were really the first ones ushering in this new era of actually caring about how you look. I definitely think male influencers have become more of a thing, and there's definitely been more men that people are trying to aspire to.
Oh, for sure. Especially setting up the camera to watch them walking into Target and lighting the camera or lighting
First
the
of all,
candle
the fact
in
that
their
I know
apartment.
exactly who you're talking about too.
Let me stop laughing because it's not that funny.
You can
but
tell they're in their baby's first influencer era, where
for sure.
They're still trying to figure out what everybody else was figuring out in 2011, or at least what women were figuring out in 2011, getting their own Becca Moda and Jackie Aina.
I was literally gonna say not their intro Jackie Aina era, because that's genuinely what it's giving, that early 2011 YouTuber era where the quality wasn't too good and the girls were still rocking the side bangs,
trying to get comfortable in front of the camera, trying not to be awkward.
No, literally.
And you can see the societal impact it's had on just regular everyday men too. Again, the parallels between what we were seeing 10-15 years ago for women and what we're seeing now are just so obvious. And I even remember my friend having a layover in Istanbul and being that is just the most amount of bald men I've ever seen in one place at one time.
Mm-hmm. For sure. I definitely think that not only have we seen this shift, but it's also even become something that I think women are picking up on and being this is a bit this is not the same environment that we used to be in. And
have
even
you been victimized by a man with a dangly cross earring?
If
or
so,
possibly one who started painting his nails in the last 18 months.
Poorly chipped. If so, please call the 1-800 hotline. The men are trying to get with the woman.
And if he started growing out his hair post-pandemic, call 911.
Please. But honestly, we've done enough of our joking on the men, but let's actually start to look into the psychology and sociology of why this is even happening, as well as kind of the scientific procedures of what they're even getting done, because Lord knows I think we're all a bit confused about that. So already when I was researching on this topic, looking up male beauty standards, it is a pitiful amount of articles that come up in peer-reviewed databases, okay, yielding very few results as compared to their female counterparts. It's seeming like female beauty standards have been studied dating back to the 50s, across different ethnicities, across different countries. So many different multimodal studies have been done, and definitely cannot say the same for men, but I definitely think we're going to see an increase in that, especially in the next 5 to 10 years. But what I do know is that there are already prevailing sociocultural norm theories, which basically argue that the attitudes people hold towards their body are the result of social and cultural influences that are often conveyed in the mass media. And these ideals are considered largely unattainable, and we see that this ends up evoking body dissatisfaction in the general population. For example, professional models are thinner than 98% of women. So keep in mind that these people that we're kind of painting as the ideal human standard are so far out of reach of the vast majority of the female population. And it's also become a trend that images in men's magazines have become leaner and more muscular. So we're definitely seeing that for both men and women, there's definitely a stringent ideal body standard that's implemented. The difference is, however, the ways in which we see those images disseminated in society. For example, adolescents are far more likely to agree about the characteristics of the ideal female rather than the ideal male. And although men will identify muscularity as an ideal, they can also recognize that the media presents them a variety of different male body types. Okay, we see the super ripped Chris Hemsworths, but we also had the Chris Pratt when he was on Parks and Recreation and he was a bit chubbier. We have a whole thing about dad bods. Like, men have heterogeneous representation of what their bodies can look like, versus women kind of have one specific kind of thin but yet still curvy somehow image that we're all supposed to kind of fit into the box of. It's also been demonstrated that greater exposure to sociocultural norms via different forms of media consumption, whether that's magazines or television, often predate greater body dissatisfaction and more likely lead to eating disorder symptoms among women and greater concern with muscularity among men. However, like I said before, we're seeing a big discrepancy between men when we're actually performing these experiments on body dissatisfaction and then their actual body dissatisfaction in real life. And this is because they are far less likely to be bombarded by media images showcasing a singular ideal of beauty and what that looks like, versus women's real life experiences actually do mimic these experimental conditions. And they are likely to see specific singular images of what a female body standard should look like. And they're just exposed to greater amounts of these idealized versions. So here are 4 key findings that I found from a pretty hallmark study. They mostly looked at Caucasian people in the West, and they kind of extrapolated that since Western beauty standards are kind of very pervasive, they found that exposure to Western media was associated with greater body dissatisfaction reported across 26 countries. So they were kind of using that as the prevailing beauty standard. Obviously, once you go into different countries, once you go into different ethnic groups, there's going to be differences, but that is kind of what we're going to be focusing on today. And the 4 key findings that they found was 1, homogeneity. There is definitely an ideal for both genders, but the day-to-day interactions that they have with these media definitely differ. Women's media images, like I've said before, are a lot more stringent, a lot more homogenous, while men have greater range with their bodies, and both men and women in the study were able to notate these differences. Also, pervasiveness. Women are far more likely to be bombarded with images of an ideal woman, and men and women in the study felt like they encountered those images far more. Now, this is a new one, and I thought this was very interesting. They also looked at attainability. Even though women are far less likely to attain what is considered the ideal female beauty standard, they receive way more media images and content aimed at how to attain the ideal female beauty standard, whether it's through dieting, whether it's through exercise, whether it's through facial procedures. They're far more likely to get media based around that. And women in the study did notate that it was unattainable for a large amount of women to be able to reach these standards, but they actually held themselves to a far higher standard, which is honestly indicative of the fact that women are often stuck between the understanding that these rules are too rigid and too strict, but also their ingrained desire to meet them nonetheless. And lastly, impact was their last key finding. They found that both men and women in the study when they encountered a simulated reality like women's day-to-day rigid norm experience, both felt worse about their appearance. Okay, hear that. When men in the study were subject to the environment that women are subject to in terms of appearance, they actually ended up feeling a lot worse about their appearance. But when both men and women in the study encountered the heterogeneous images that are encountered by men, neither group felt worse about their appearance, which honestly, to me, out of everything that they discussed in the study, was the most important part, was the fact that when you put men and women in an environment that simulates women's day-to-day reality, everybody ends up mad. Everybody ends up not feeling as good about the way that they look in their body. But when you subject them to men's day-to-day, everybody ends up being fine. And obviously, this is something that, just from my lived experiences and the lived experiences of other women I know, definitely holds true. But it's interesting to see the way that that played out in an actual experimental context. And another interesting study was done in Germany, and they were also looking at double standards in beauty standards. And listen, I think we could have a whole separate podcast episode just about the double standards between men and women and how much one specific gender is allowed to slip up and be imperfect while the other, listen, like, if you even have stretch marks, baby, go ahead and just exit stage left. And they found in 2019 that if you showed different images of bodies of the respective gender, participants were showed like their own face on a body and then the face of another person on a body, and they were asked to rate their emotional reaction to the body according to valence and arousal, and also rate the bodies with respect to attractiveness, body fat, and muscle mass. Men actually had higher self-deprecating scores for the obese, thin, average weight, and hypermuscular bodies, but they had higher self-serving scores for the athletic body, meaning that when they saw themselves on bodies that they didn't necessarily like, they would actually rate themselves even lower than they would rate the other person. But when they saw themselves on an athletic body that they liked, they would rate themselves a lot higher than the other person. Whereas women were a bit more middle ground. Women obviously had no self-serving scores. They never ranked themselves any higher, but they also had lower self-deprecating double standards in correspondence to men, which the study then went on to argue maybe actually sets men up to be more successful when it comes to their bodily image, because when they see a standard of beauty that they like, they're more likely to actually rank themselves higher and think that that's more attainable for themselves, versus women do not feel the same way.
So now that we've had like some information about the male beauty standard and the differences that we've seen with men and women, with this uptick that we've been seeing, online and social media and even in person, what exactly are these men getting done? So I have been honestly so curious about the hair transplantation industry, especially in Istanbul, since that seems to be a very high tourist destination for this procedure. So I was looking into it, and I figured out the specific type of follicular hair transplantation that they're doing is follicular unit excision. So it's one of like many methods of hair follicle harvesting, and it takes around 8 hours. So at first you generally find like a donor area, which is why you've probably seen men walk around with like a U-shaped patch on their head, because they usually use the back or the sides of the head because they tend to be more resistant to hair loss. However, using the beard or the chest or other areas happens every once in a while, but I would say the back of the head is the most common. So at first they trim the donor area down, which is another reason why these men tend to be like fully bald after they get the procedure. And these are usually done under local anesthesia using a circular punch. And robotic devices have become very much more prevalent when doing this procedure, but like motorized hand devices are still commonly used and came beforehand. And when you use these like circular punches, it leaves that, again, like small rounded scar that you see. So robots have been preferenced to be used in recently when it comes to like hair follicle transplants, because they're less likely to create buried grafts, is what happens when the hair like twists around itself and goes deeper into the dermis than where it originally was. But at the same time, robots are generally for people who have more of an expertise in it, and it's recommended that you start with a manual punch when you first start performing these procedures, because like with the three layers of the skin, like the epidermis, the dermis, and the hypodermis, they're made up of different types of tissue, so you can feel the density difference when punching into the scalp. So the follicular unit usually has like 1 to 4 hair follicles with the type of circular punch that's used in Istanbul. And it all like not only does it have the hair follicles, it has the erector pili muscle that's connected, and also the surrounding connective tissue in the hypodermis, as well as the nerves and the blood vessels that are like supplying the hair follicle. So there's a lot of diversity when it comes to like hair transplant results. There are people online who have definitely had some complaints, and also people who are incredibly happy with their results. And I feel like there's two things that kind of determine that. One, the accuracy of the transplantation and who is completing it, but also two, just the diversity of the viscoelasticity of the donor area, which is how like viscous, but also how elastic the skin in the donor area is. And that again differs patient to patient, so it can sometimes produce unpredictable results. But in terms of the accuracy of the procedure, the insertion depth is one of the with the circular punch is one of the main things that needs to be accurate when performing it. So while they're performing this, they are again using that circular punch to take the hair follicles out of the donor area and putting it in the recipient area. However, and then they're also using like a saline solution periodically to make sure like the skin strength remains as they're injecting into it. So after the 8 hour procedure, the healing process isn't actually too bad. There's definitely a good amount of swelling and redness, and the doctors tend to prescribe prednisolone for that swelling. And around 2 to 8 weeks after the surgery, the original hair actually falls out. So a lot of people end up looking, honestly, more bald than they came in, which causes a lot of anxiety. But that's because that hair is cut off from the blood supply that's like actually giving the hair the nutrients to grow. However, the follicle that was actually implanted stays in and is able to start producing new hair, and they tend to see that density start coming back at around 3 months. So like at the beginning of that 3 month period, they're really at their lowest. Some people even report feeling more bald than when they came in, but people tend to start seeing results that they're actually happy with by the 9 to 18 month spectrum. They're also often put on minoxidil and finasteride to help the hair growth that they have, because they want to prevent any extra hair loss from happening. And there's also antibiotics that they are put on to prevent infections in the area. So why Istanbul specifically? Their hair transplant industry right now is worth over 1 billion US dollars. And I think the reason that people gravitate towards it is definitely the availability and the price. So the industry in Istanbul is not very regulated, so the exact amount of operations in clinics is actually unknown. However, it's still in line with EU regulations. It's not like they're just like running like some form of like illegal business, but it's definitely a lot more lax than what we would like expect in comparison to like let's say the United States. So like explain like the main procedure that they do is follicular unit excision. And for the whole experience, the transplantation, the translator, oftentimes it's around $4,000 to $5,000 for a nicer clinic in 2021. But this is not including travel fees, but that's still like around half of what it is in the US. Like honestly, even when I did previously see information about hair transplants in the US, it was like $2 per graft on these like billboards on the highway. And even then, people were needing like hundreds of grafts. And that's not even including all of the other price issues, taking off of work, things of the sort. But there's been a controversy surrounding the way that Istanbul is able to make these procedures so cheap. For one, the use of technicians in the industry and the extent of what the technicians can do has become a very like big point of contention between the professionals in the industry. So of course everybody uses like technicians. It's not just the doctor, but many people share the opinion that when it comes to actually taking out and implanting the hair follicles, anything that is a cut on a human being is surgery and should be completed by the doctor and the doctor only. However, oftentimes in the cheaper clinics that can run as low as $2,000, they have the technicians actually completing the transplants, and the doctor is just an overseer. And the people who have technicians actually completing the transplants, in their defense, are saying that these technicians are highly trained, they're very specialized. Some of the doctors are saying that they even complete these transplants better than I do, and that there isn't actually much risk to the technicians doing it as in comparison to others. However, it's still unethical and even illegal in some countries. So some men are like also prefer aggressive hair transplantations, which they see that they can get in Turkey, which with quite low hairlines, which doesn't necessarily age well. And, you know, I've also always wondered this when I would see people get quite aggressive, like hair transplants, like what happens when the hair continues to fall out? Like if you're going to have a whole U spot gone and you already, you know, took 3 inches off your hairline, like what happens next? And, you know, a lot of doctors in Europe and the US will refuse to do it, but some of the other like more like cheaper doctors in Turkey are open to completing that. And the transplants still do stay in and don't fall out when they do get it, because it comes from the area of the head that's resistant to hair loss. And another really big factor in male beauty standards that I think has definitely been picking up is the gym, and specifically strength training. Like,
Lord, here come the gym bros.
Honestly, you cannot escape them. Like, I'm not even gonna lie, like I am a victim of becoming one of the people who gotten into strength training. Like, one, because like obviously like osteoporosis is more common in women. You know, I want bone density, I want bone strength, but I'm not gonna lie, like the beauty standard hasn't influenced my desire to also be a part of this. So there's definitely been like a strong rise in popularity of gym going the last 5 years. Definitely started to pick up since the COVID pandemic, with gym memberships increasing 3.6% in 2019 since like pre-pandemic, which might not sound like a lot, but when you actually see how much resistance and strength training that people have been getting into, you can clearly see a shift. For example, according to ClassPass, which is a subscription-based fitness app, in 2022, there was a 94% increase from the prior year for strength-based classes. Like, people have definitely been way more into strength and resistance training. And again, like if you are in any form of social media, you cannot escape these people. Their white rice, that ground beef getting mixed together with eggs that makes you look like you want to throw up. Honestly, it looks like throw up on the plate. Like, there's definitely been this increase in like the gym being your only hobby and the biggest part of your life. Gym influencers coming back into play, things that I haven't really seen gym influencers thrive on any platform outside of YouTube until like the last 5 years. And now we have people like Chris Bumstead, who is like a huge like influencer. He also has won like the men's classic bodybuilding competition the last like 3 times at the very least. He has millions of followers. He sells protein, he sells 1,000 other things, and like he is like a god to these men. However, with the increase in gym going, the increase in steroid use has definitely upticked. And this is something that honestly, I didn't even see us reverting back to the Arnold Schwarzenegger days of steroid use. Like these men, you will see a man like, wow, what a 35-year-old. He is 17. He is 17. Okay. Acne on the back, stress in the face, and this steroid use causes an increase in liver tumors, mood swings, heart enlargement, can reduce your quality of life as well as the length of your life. And we have these young men definitely starting to take these substances, oftentimes illegally. I couldn't even find much information on how steroid use has increased in the United States, and it's estimated around 500,000 men in the UK have used it within the last year, and those estimates are predicted to be incredibly lower than what they actually are because of how much illegal use is going on. So I'm just like, with the issues surrounding hair transplantation, the issues with the technician use, the issues surrounding steroids and body dysmorphia, and these gym bros dedicating their entire lives to setting up a camera and choking down food that they clearly don't want to eat, like it's obviously just fueled by this pressure of the beauty standard and social media to make you feel like you need to look a certain way.
For sure. And honestly, I even think that it's interesting when we kind of see the traditionally masculine archetype that's often been present throughout society of a muscular man that really keeps up with his fitness and, you know, exemplifies other traditionally male characteristics that we associate. But at the same time, I definitely have noticed post 2019 and honestly post TikTok, there's been a shift too in that another male archetype has kind of arrived. And honestly, I like to call it like the Vinny Hacker-esque kind of aesthetic. You know, he has all of his sons, and we're really seeing the rise and like painting your nails, getting specific like spiderweb tattoos, dangly cross earrings, wearing jewelry, pouring more into aestheticizing your clothing too. Another thing that I've definitely realized is that men are investing way more in fashion than I really remember from when I was growing up, especially with the media that I was encountering. Fashion was something that girls were into. Dressing up and looking cute for class photos was something that me and my friends would talk about. It really wasn't until I got into the later part of high school and really mostly seeing that blow up in college when I really start to see men really start to invest in specific clothing brands, invest in specific like skincare products, decide to get specific aesthetic changes through tattoos, through nails, through jewelry. Yeah. And you can see the shift, and oftentimes you can also see that there is a tinge of pandering going on in the things that men will espouse on these social media platforms and the specific changes that they're doing, which also begs the question, are you doing these changes because you want to, or are you doing these changes because you feel like it will attract a certain demographic that might be into it?
Yeah, and I feel like because men's fashion is developing, it's like inevitable that it becomes more feminine, because masculinity itself is just a cage. Like, if you ever want to look not good, creative, or not boring, there will be femininity included in the way you dress. And you can see this not only in men's fashion, but in things that queer men have been doing, honestly. Like, half of the trends that are becoming more and more popular in men is them just kind of looking to the side, seeing what queer people are doing and kind of making it into something that would fit their desires and their aesthetic. And it's so interesting to see the juxtaposition of the way queer men are treated and how their masculinity is diminished. However, when you want to look like you are a man who's fine, when you want to look like a man who's cute, you know exactly what person on Pinterest that you have to go towards. Like, they were the original curators of men's fashion. Many of the designer brands that we have, like Yves Saint Laurent, these were queer men. And even now, like, they are the original influencers, and y'all are using them as your blueprint, but somehow still turning around and acting like you're better than them, which I find to be quite hilarious.
Honestly, I'm glad that you brought that up, because I even myself think it's interesting that men all of a sudden want to align themselves with the norms and behaviors that once used to get mocked. Like, I also remember that men who did pay excessive attention to their appearance, or men who did care about skincare and fashion and stuff like that, were literally labeled with the term metrosexual, which is like a whole term based around the idea of men who like keep up with themselves basically, and they're labeled were previously labeled as being excessively feminine, but now all of a sudden that the tide has shifted and they see that it curries favor with women and maybe even larger society. All of a sudden they've jumped on that train and they're ready to race to the bottom to see who could be the next TikTok boy of the month and who can be the next trending icon. And that is especially interesting. And I also think that is a luxury that's not afforded to women either, of getting to decide when you want to opt into beauty standards. Women are kind of stuck in a cage, like you said previously, but at this time ours is very much a gilded cage and a pink tax of like, we're almost told that we want these things, that we want to look these ways, and there's subliminal and overt messaging that's done throughout our entire lives to get us hooked onto a myriad of products and a myriad of procedures and like just routines that we don't need. But there's never a time where I will be able to wake up one day and decide, oh, when I will go to a professional event, I'm not going to wear makeup and I'm going to wear pants and I'm not going to do certain things, because I know that I will be viewed a certain way. And men kind of have the option of being able to choose or decide if they want to play into this.
Honestly, and that's why I can't stop making fun of them, because at the end of the day, there is resentment as like knowing how I, as a woman, have more pressure on me from the beauty standard, but I am scrutinized more for actually trying to follow it than men are. Like, listen, I'm not saying I don't feel bad for these men, especially young men who are in a vulnerable position, men who are losing their hair, men who feel a pressure to look a certain way. But as a woman and someone who is having to go through an unimaginable amount of pressure in comparison, it just is absolutely mind-blowing to see the way that this is being taken. Okay, like, men are getting these hair transplants, good for them, do what makes you feel confident, king, and seeing like support from greater society that they're getting. Okay, like Chris Bumstead, he is, again, like millions of followers. He goes straight to Istanbul with his buddy. Okay, they go doing on a double trip. He gets his hair transplant, and no one really feels too differently about him. People still see him as the absolute standard. Like, again, he wins every time. He blows the competition away. Men continuously idolize him. He has mostly positive comments, but let a female influencer decide to get plastic surgery and publicly broadcast that and see how everybody turns on her. And that's why to this day I'm just like, all I can do is laugh to keep from crying, because as much as I wish that we as a society weren't even moving towards this direction in terms of making beauty standards more strict for men to get closer to egalitarianism, instead of going the opposite direction and loosening them for women, it's just so saddening to see that even when people do try to make the playing field more equal, at the end of the day, society is always going to have that double standard and that expectation for women and queer people that they just do not have for men.
No, definitely,
especially straight men.
No, perfectly said. I know we were speaking about this earlier, and I always say that SZA is the perfect example of this, in which the way that she was treated pre-plastic surgery was terrible, but the way that she was treated post-plastic surgery was also terrible. And people definitely think that women who get plastic surgery are incredibly easy targets, and it's almost socially acceptable that if you come out and like bash a woman that gets plastic surgery or put their medical information out on the internet and almost force them into giving away their private and personal medical information, like these are all normal things that we see continuously going on, especially on social media, and people think it's acceptable. They judge these women, they shame these women, they cast them out because they think that if you change your natural self, this is a cheat code, or that you're perpetuating unhealthy beauty standards, even though honestly, to clock some tea, y'all perpetuate unhealthy beauty standards in all other aspects of life. You just have an issue with women actually having the autonomy and ability to change things for themselves. And I think there's an aspect of jealousy too at the fact that some women can increase their social value. They play into the game that y'all set up for them, and now you're mad at them.
I mean, they're always mad at women when they start winning the game that you set up. I mean, look at the way they dehumanize girls with BBLs. Look at the way they dehumanize OnlyFans girls. You know, you are supposed to be a subject of oppression. Don't like your oppression too much, or don't figure out how to win the game, or you are actually like an awful woman, you're an awful person, and you're a loser because you're supposed to act like you don't want the things that I'm forcing onto you. So much of men and masculinity is about force, is about conquering, is about treating people in a way that they don't want to be treated and having your way and having your will. And honestly, it's seen so much in the female beauty standard, and especially when we're looking in comparison to the male beauty standard. And honestly, as a personal closing statement, all I'll say is this is not good. Like, this, like, even though it's just like, yes, like, it might be nice to see a couple more men with abs or a couple more men who actually look like they washed their ass before they left today, this is not good, okay? Men definitely had a certain aspect of humanity that I always felt that weren't afforded to women, to be able to look the way a human being actually looks, okay? To not have to wear makeup, to have the hair that grows naturally on your body, to wear an outfit that nobody cares about, and to not be held to some kind of standard for it. And the fact that we're not taking a step back and realizing, wow, women should have these opportunities too. Things are just getting more and more strict for both men and women is a terrible direction for us to be moving in beauty standards in society, okay? Like, this is just not good.
And in the future, I definitely think we'd encourage you guys to really engage critically with the media that you see and really wonder if you actually want to be intaking this. Like I said previously, when both men and women are subject to more stringent beauty standards, nobody wins. Everybody suffers. Everybody ends up having worse eating habits, end up subjecting themselves to unhealthier decisions and lifestyles in pursuit of what I think we all can agree is a broadly and wildly unattainable goal for all. And I definitely think, like Gold already mentioned, we need to be moving in the opposite direction as a society. We need to instead lean into the fact that we are humans, okay? Homo sapiens. And everybody is going to have things about them that are imperfect, and that's okay. Maybe it's okay that you have strawberry legs, and maybe it's okay that you're not fully built with an 8-pack. There needs to be an intrinsic love and desire, not only for yourself, but also mirroring that out to other people. I think that if we're kinder to everyone, we can be kinder to ourselves. And with that, we'll close out. And not only that, please make sure to check out the required reading that we're going to be linking in the description box. Y'all are always free to hit us with an email or suggest any topics that you really want us to do some research and report back on. But with that, we're going to let you guys have a good rest of your day. So, bye.